scenario that Kim spoke of earlier, where actually you could write to the whole block of flats, and using Wordsworth as an example. So those are blocks of 9. You'd write to all 9 in a block, and you probably wouldn't get all 9 opting in. So, you know, you'd only be delivering caddies and collecting from those that genuinely wanted to do it. And if they did genuinely want to do it, chances are what they put out is also going to be good, which, you know, that's great from our point of view. And certainly along, you know, Wordsworth area, that kind of collection could well work.
And to be honest, the empowerment of actually controlling what you're putting in would actually, I think, because it's my ward, would actually encourage others to come along and do a bit as well, because they would see this working. And there is space at the bottom of the gap thing, but I mean, there's 13 blocks of those within Great Holland, so that's 13 lots of 9. So you're still saying that there's quite a lot of good, if the trucks went to collect there. But then there's the other one. I mean, there's Mount Pleasant, where there's, I think, 186 flats, which is, again, that how you would do that. But there's plenty of space at the bottom of those flats to put stuff if the truck comes along. So, and then there's the one in Priestwood, which Trish, I'm not sure we'll talk about, which is
Boyd Court.
Boyd Court, which is, again, which is an enormous number. But if it was given as the option, I think it would still mean many would opt in, because on social media, people are asking, when can we start? I mean, it is a positive thing. And so I think it would be good if they were given the opportunity. Anyway, I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Lovely to your clock again.
Sorry.
Michael, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. In fact, I have 2 questions. The first one is actually directed at Kim, and then the next one at Claire. We've obviously spent quite a lot of time on the subject of flats. We've not actually talked about HMOs. Do you have a situation in some of the other boroughs where HMOs are treated separately from flats? In other words, you actually create a subdivision that you have houses, flats, etc. Then you also have HMOs, and then subsequently you actually have blocks of flats. So is there a halfway house where you actually deal with HMOs separately from flats?
Yes, in essence, and it depends how the HMOs are registered, because if you have a, quote marks, shared property with one council tax stream, then they'll get one caddy, one kitchen caddy, and they'll get one outside caddy. Where they're each registered separately, they would get one of each. So there are some HMOs that we have in some parts of the country where we've got houses where effectively you've kind of got 3 studio flats in there, and they'd all get their own bins. And others where it's more like a shared house with a shared kitchen facility, in which case they would get one inside and one outside, unless they requested more, in which case we're always happy. Well, our clients are always happy to give them out, because they want the yield and they want the participation.
Probably worth just saying off the back of what Kim said, at the moment in the borough, we haven't actually got any HMOs left on bulk bin collections. We did have a couple, but they've actually been demolished. And I'm not sure what is actually being built in their place, whether it is just simply going to be another HMO setup, or whether actually they're moving to building a block of flats. And the HMOs that are, as Kim kind of touched on, of more of a house, shared type house situation, that have household size bins and household provision, they are all on the current food waste for houses service, because they have, you know, the small bins. So yeah, we have to watch this space a bit on whether we get any more back with bulks.
Fine. Thank you for that. In fact, Chairman, if I can, there's also a question for Claire. I'm mindful that we are actually on custom live streaming service, but you mentioned about flats. Are you the relationship with Silver in terms of them cooperating and cleaning the bins and such like? What is the situation? Are they cooperative? Are they supporting us in the aspiration of actually collecting more food waste?
Michael, I think that's going to be sensitive commercial information. I think.
Right. Okay. Then we'll ask it afterward. Fine. Thank you,
Yeah,
Chairman.
Okay. Okay, Bob, please.
Thank you, John. I think with your last comment, this may be a bit sensitive as well. I was going to ask Kim, with your experience around the country of doing flats, and when you do presumably the financial assessment as to whether it's worth it or it's not worth it, have you come across any instances in boroughs, and I'm not asking you to name them, where other council taxpayers will be subsidising the cost of emptying food waste from those flats?
I can answer some of that question in the sense that generally the viability is not our decision to make. So if Claire said to me, we need to do food waste collection in flats, then I need to make some assumptions about what resources we would need as a collection business to collect the food waste from those flats. I wouldn't make those assumptions in isolation. I'd make them based on our experience in other places, and also I'd make them in conjunction with Claire and Damien and our experiences within the borough. And then when I can tell them exactly how much it will cost for us to collect from flats, it's then Claire and Damien they will go away and look at, based on those yield assumptions, is it going to be worth it? And that's where the decision sits. And with all of these things we have to make assumptions. We don't have we can't say we know exactly what we'll get from each flats. We can't, so we just have to do the best that we can. And sometimes things perform better than we expect, and sometimes they don't perform as well as we expect. So I know that's not a complete answer to your question, but it's probably the best answer that I can give. And Claire and Damien might be able to answer more, but as you said, possibly not in this forum.
Okay, can I just ask, I mean, there's a common thread now beginning to flow through this Flats HMOs situation, as far as I'm concerned, having listening to the people from London and yourself, and that is there is a very low participation in terms of what you would want. Has any of these areas, before they've started and committed, done a survey of all the residents in flats to see what their thoughts are and what their participation just might be before they go ahead and take it on the decision without any evidence?
I can only speak for the Suez contracts. Some of those contracts, we've not been involved in that because the local authorities made the decision prior to the tender process that they are or they aren't going to do that. In East Devon, there was a lot of consultation done with residents, a lot. And that consultation showed that in the main, those residents were very keen for that service and very willing to do what it took to comply with the service guidelines. So yes, I think that what they've done in London with the big tower blocks, tower hamlets and things like that, I genuinely don't know whether anybody's ever done any sort of pre-work other than make assumptions based on the performance of others. We certainly haven't done it personally, but I could find out if that would be of interest to you, if any of our other clients have done any focus groups or forums.
No, I mean, as I say, there's a clear thread here that it's low participation. I think before, personally, I ever put my right hand up in the air to support something, I'd want some evidence that it's going to be worth it and not a cost to the council taxpayer, as opposed to a benefit. So thanks for your answers.
I think just to add to what Kim said on that, I think sometimes it's not always about the fact that a resident might not want to participate. So I think if you ask the question in general, I think most of them would say they would want to recycle more, they would want to recycle their food. But sometimes I think there are other barriers to them doing so. So particularly around flats, recycling in general is more tricky for them. So if you live in a house, generally speaking, your bins might be outside your front door or outside your back door. So when you empty your bins from within your house, you pretty much take that bag straight out, tip it into the bin, back in your front door. Of course, in a block of flats, if you happen to live on the first or second floor, you've got to bring that waste down the stairs, outside, across the car park, perhaps to the bin store. So you might choose to make the trip to the bin store en route to going to your car to go out and do something else. And of course, then if you're left with that food waste caddy that you've just emptied into the other bin, you might not want to take that out in your car. So actually that then becomes a bit of a barrier to that person actually doing it. So they may want to do it, but when the reality hits, it actually all becomes a little bit awkward. And I think that can be a big factor with residents actually doing the things when it actually comes to it.
Okay, thank you. Is that everything, Bob? The answer here.
Yes, thanks, John, for the moment.
Lovely, thanks. Sandra, please.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask, in your experience, how long should a trial period be before you see a sort of steady, realistic result? And also, is the trial period really a little bit of a moving feast? Can you sort of amend things during those trial periods? You know, if something isn't working, maybe introduce something else and respond to feedback.
Oh, absolutely. To your second point, absolutely. The concept of a trial is actually really interesting, because often a trial is never a trial, because once you put something in place, it's quite hard to take it away, even if it's not hugely successful. And that's something I think is definitely worth considering. Is we talked about that cost benefit analysis. Is it worth doing? Now, if you're a resident, that's of no interest to you. You might have a block of 10 flats, maybe only 3 people participate in the food waste service, but those 3 people, they really like the fact that they can participate. Now, that might not make it cost effective for the authority if that's a pattern across the borough, but it does make it quite difficult to take away from residents once you've put it in place. Often we find trials just become a service, but they retain the word trial in front of them, which gives an option for change or to rescind it at any point. Similarly, you've got to think about the cost of implementing a trial. So at the moment, we don't have any capacity on our vehicles to collect from flats. They are full from households. So there's a cost then to implementing a trial. So I think you need to think very carefully about whether that is worth it. Once that trial is in place, you'd want it at least 3 months, and you can of course change it as you go, because it is a trial. As long as you're communicating with residents, telling them what you're doing and why you're doing, then there's no reason why you can't change what's happening mid-flow if it's not working.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go back to Claire, if I may, because she made one comment. So Claire, you're under the impression that all our HMOs, sorry, none of our HMOs at present have a bulk bin.
Yeah, at the moment that's right. Like one particular one has literally only just been demolished though. I'm not sure what will be going back in its place, whether the landlord is simply going to build another building that will be a HMO. We shall see. Okay, so I'm going to pose a question for Damien, but not to be answered tonight because it'd be putting him on the spot, but maybe he can come back to us at another time. Is there any possibility when we issue a license to a HMO that would involve a bulk bin, we can actually have it as part of their condition on their license, they have to make provision for a food waste bin?
Thanks for not putting me on the spot, Chairman. I will have a look into that and come back to you if that's okay.
Or if it's something that we could implement through a committee,
yep,
and make it a condition. So I'll give you that food for thought there, Damien.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Mary, please.
No clock, sorry, okay. Can you tell me, you have no capacity to collect as a trial from flats, so that would mean that you'd have to bring in a new truck from somewhere. So is it possible to hire these trucks on a trial before, or does it mean the borough would have to buy a new truck to do a trial run for 3 months, or could you provide a truck from somewhere else on a trial period, please?
There's lots of options, Mary, that we could use to provide the resources necessary to do a trial. It would wholly depend on the size of the trial, to be honest with you. It would wholly depend on how many blocks of flats and how many caddies. For example, we could use the existing resources and just operate them slightly outside of the normal operating hours. So how we would resource that and what it would cost would vary depending on the trial requirements. It's probably the best answer that I could give you.
Okay, thank you.
So going on from that, Kim, you would then recommend that we were very selective and probably in consultation with yourselves as to which areas we choose for the trial?
Personally, I would say the smaller the trial, the better. It becomes far easier to manage from both our side and the council side. It enables you to build up a picture of what works and what doesn't work, and you can then extrapolate from that as to what the scenario would be in other flats of a similar nature. And similarly, it would give you a chance to build up kind of a communication methodology scenario that you could use outside of that initial trial, because there is no reason why a trial can't extend and grow depending on progress. So it becomes, if you like, a phased approach, a small group of select properties where there's individual dialogue and communication with the residents. We know, for example, that the recycling is good. We know this space. We might do individual caddies, for example. You could also implement a trial whereby you might use one collection methodology in one block of flats and a different collection methodology in another, as long as we can collect on the vehicle. So the smaller the trial, the less it costs you, and then you can extend out from there. That's from a service point of view, I'm thinking. Clearly, Claire and Damien might have other ideas from a council perspective when it comes to sort of meeting residents' expectations.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Sandra, is that an old hand or a new hand, please?
An old one. Sorry, Chair, just take it down.
That's fine, not a problem. Okay, Bob, please.
Thank you, John. It's really, we seem to be talking not about the big blocks of flats. And I'm thinking immediately, as we do on our own patch, Kelvin Gates, which has got, well over 100 flats. And then if you think over East Hampstead, you look at Point Royal. There's a huge number of flats in there. Mm. And I'm thinking whatever we do in terms of assessing those for a trial, we ought to be looking at somewhere which is large, middle and small, so as we can assess and get the evidence of what it costs and whether it's worth it or not. It's just a statement. I'm not asking for a response, but I just think we ought to be looking at all the levels, large, middle and small.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Sandra, please.
Yes, so Bob, you just started me thinking. In planning, I know Councillor Hayes, Dorothy, always asks questions about the bins, but perhaps going forward, as we have apartments being built within the town centre, we should be very stringent about the size of the bin stores and be clear as a council just what would work for future collections. Just flagging it, really. Again, wasn't really a question.
Kim, in your vast experience then with planning, obviously the developers, if they're not forced to, won't. But what problems have you encountered when new blocks have been built?
It's the same problems everywhere, to be quite honest with you. What comes first is the collection methodology. So each local authority defines what their collection methodology is, what the frequency is, etc. Once the collection methodology is defined, containerisation is limited, for example. So once collection methodology is defined, then councils can write their own planning guidelines based on how big a bin store might be. So how many bins of what type and what space is required. From a collection point of view, our main problem is access to bin stores. So when it comes to food waste in flats, until such time as the council's completed a trial or several trials and determined exactly what the methodology is going to be and gathered information, as has been suggested, on what sort of yield you could expect from a block of flats. Only when you've done all that can you then determine what the containerisation would need to be, and therefore how much space is required to go alongside the existing refuse and recycling bins. Once that's built into planning, then it is my understanding that developers need to comply with that. We have a great relationship in Bracknell with Councillor Hayes, and obviously with Damien and Claire and their team. And we often, as a service provider, get involved by going and seeing new developments to make sure that our vehicles are going to be able to access those bin stores safely. So from a collection point of view, it's space and it's access. The main issue really stems from permitted developments where it's existing use converted into flats, because I believe, and I'm not a planning expert, but I believe sometimes the rules are slightly different and you're making use of existing space, and we can get a lot more problems there when it comes to both access and storage.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll talk about the planning at another meeting. So I think that's going to be high on the agenda. Any other questions for Kim or Claire on the question that they were answering? Okay, no more. So if you want to go on to the next one, please, Kim.
Okay, so we've talked about sites in general quite comprehensively. The next question was a view on a partial implementation plan or trial period. I think we've covered that through the questions. Is there anything else we'd like to share? At this moment, I don't think so, because you've all asked loads and loads of questions. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground. There was a question about, would we consider resident meetings and presentations, especially for sheltered housing? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I think that's absolutely essential to get buy-in from residents. So as a service provider, we'd always be more than happy to attend and support the council in those meetings. Particularly sheltered housing. I think Claire and I have discussed this. We think some of the sheltered housing blocks would be a really good start for some trials. And then the very last question was, would it be possible to have flats to have individual caddies? Councillor Temperton raised this, and I think we've agreed that yes, in certain circumstances, then we think that would probably be a good option for some places. So there's no other questions, I think. Have I got on to it? Is there another page?
No, there's no other page for you.
There's no other page for me. There's lots of other pages, but not for me.
No. I just got two follow-on questions from what you've just asked. I've forgotten one of them already. I've just remembered it. If you've got the stats from Bracknell Forest, and Claire might be able to pop in as well. If you was to transfer that to other councils that you collect for, what percentage, if you're collecting, say, for example, 3 kg from a household, what would be the average collection from each flat on average on established routes?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. It's such a difficult question. I try and put that in perspective and tell you why. I'm not trying to avoid it at all. At my contract in Malden, we collect weekly food waste from households in exactly the same manner as we do here in Bracknell, from the 23-litre caddies at the side of the road in 7.5-tonne vehicles. We get on average about 1.6 kilograms of food waste per household. That's apportioned out across all households in the borough. in reality, we probably get about 70% participation. So in reality, we're getting a little bit more in terms of kilograms per household, but we don't get the participation. In Bracknell, we're getting, the last time I looked, it was 2.5 kilograms per household at over 90% participation. So looking at it like that, I think it's quite difficult to make an assumption about the yield that we might get from flats based on what we're getting from households. I know if we look at RAP information, which is a great source of information, I think on average, nationally, you're looking about 0.3 of a kilogram to 0.5 of a kilogram per flat, and much, much lower participation. So yeah, I guess there's a little bit of that, unfortunately.
Okay, so basically just doing a good model then, isn't it, really, before we implement?
Absolutely. I would echo what Kim said. And I think another probably good indicator as to how people in flats may participate may be around the amount of recyclables that we actually find in the refuse. So obviously we had the waste analysis done that we used to inform the collections for houses for food waste. And actually we were finding blue bin recyclables in the houses bins. The blue bin recyclables in the flats bins is far more prevalent. So there's a lot of people living in flats that aren't recycling properly at the moment. And what I suspect that actually is probably a number of people are, and then a number of people aren't, and there's not a lot of middle ground there. So I think we could probably make the assumption in blocks where we know the dry recycling isn't brilliant and there's a lot of dry recycling in the refuse, we could probably assume that the recycling for food would follow suit and be, as Kim suggests, you know, you're looking at your 0.3 to your 0.5 per flat at best.
I think it's also worth pointing out that where we get really good yields is where residents are being strongly encouraged to use the services that are provided. In Malden, we still collect refuse on a fortnightly basis. So residents, there's not as much encouragement there for residents to extract their food waste from their general waste and put it in their food bin. So when we start moving to 3 weekly refuse, so in other words, reducing the capacity of the residual bin by about the amount of food waste that was in there before a food waste collection, we start seeing those really good yields. And we also start to see an impact on the other services. So it is relevant to note that sewers are frantically delivering lots of extra blue bins at the moment to households because a lot of people are making more of an effort to recycle properly. I would say I've always recycled properly, but I have got an extra blue bin at the moment and I'm using it. And that's true of lots of people. So I think when we start looking at flats, if you keep the residual collection exactly the same, the frequency, the containerization, if you keep the recycling exactly the same, you're not really offering, the only incentive you're offering to people by offering a food waste collection is you're saying to people, this is an environmentally great thing to do. And would you like to participate in it? There's no other encouragement. And it's very difficult to determine what or how. We've already said it's quite difficult to reduce the frequency of collection or the containerization because of the nature of it. And that's something I think would come out of a trial, is understanding the impact of the food waste collection, understanding what impact it has on the residual and on the recycling, to see if there could be any movement there. I don't know if that made sense. It felt like it did.
Yeah, it did, Kim. Thank you. And one last one was regarding sheltered housing. Also, like retirement complexes. A lot of retirement complexes seem to have their refuge room self-contained within the block. So do you find that encourages, through your councils that you deal with, better recycling of dry and food waste when it's implemented?
Sheltered housing, particularly retirement housing, we find that the residents are in general, very compliant with scheme rules. There They don't produce a great deal of food waste because actually they're very good at managing their food waste and not generating it in as much as a number of other people. So, but in terms of complying with scheme rules, and a great many sheltered housing residents are very open to new ideas, very open to trying things. So that they're a great place to look at something like this.
Okay, thank you. Michael, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Maybe I should declare an interest that I'm actually passionate about food recycling. It's something that actually has captured my and my neighbours' imagination in terms of everything that can be food waste that previously went into the green bin. And I think that actually is very important. What I've got for Kim and Claire is 5 quick-fire questions. We have food liners, and I find them excellent. The green food liners go into the smaller 5-litre caddy. I hope that if we do that with HMOs, that we will also continue that provision. The second question is, it's interesting reading the documentation that Emma provided. Some of the council said that carrier bags are acceptable. I wonder if they are. I feel that when we run out of the green bags, that maybe newspaper is more appropriate. So maybe that's a question that could be asked. Also, I noted that one of the councils actually provide a sticker that they put onto the caddy, and I wonder if it's something we might do for HMOs and for flats that actually demonstrate or detail what can and can't be done. I appreciate that's in a booklet, but not everyone, to be fair, though, Chairman, reads the booklet. I think a sticker could be quite valuable in doing that. The other question that I've got is also, I think, the questionnaire, and I think, Chairman, you raised that. I think a questionnaire could be very useful for flats to actually get the level of support that might be achieved in order that we don't spend a huge amount of money providing food caddies to the flats where they say, I can't be bothered, not my problem, go away. Last but not least, there's also a difference of views with collecting cooking oil. We at Bracknell Forest Council extol the virtue of cooking oil in a sealed container, put into the outside bin to be collected. Other councils say, no, we don't want food waste oil. So what I wonder is, I'm supportive of it. What's the view of whether it's laudable or not to actually collect waste cooking oil? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Michael. I was only going to let you have one question, but I couldn't stop you. So,
all right.
Right. Do you know what? There was a lot of questions there. I can answer some of them for you.
I'm sure Claire will give you some assistance there.
Liners for caddies, that's a council decision whether you continue to fund that. Residents can use other things. I use my empty bread bags, to be honest. Yes, they don't fill the container completely, but they're pretty handy. And other bags that I get, because the facility that the food waste goes to has this funky thing called a bag splitter, which splits the bags and gets rid of them. So, you know, we would always encourage residents actually to use existing bags that they've got, plastic bags, so that they're not creating, you know, more waste unnecessarily. Claire, is that I'm right, am I?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to flats, particularly, rather than that, speaking about the houses, that what I mentioned earlier around the barriers and actually transporting that food waste from the flat, that might be some walk from potentially the bin store or the external caddy, if they are able to use something that is perhaps a stronger carrier bag, they may just be able to carry that down loose rather than feeling the need to take the 5-litre caddy with them. Because I'm not sure, I mean, the green liners we've provided, as good as they are at fitting into those 5-litre caddies, I'm not sure how a resident who lived perhaps on a second floor of a flat would feel about carrying that little liner down, you know, many steps. So the fact that we can say, right, yes, you can use a stronger carrier bag, a bread bag, that may help with that kind of thing. And newspaper was mentioned when Councillor Brossard posed the question. Yeah, newspaper's fine. People can choose to line the caddy with newspaper. And also, I mean, some people who live in houses are already choosing not to line the caddies at all and put it out loose, which is also fine. What? Right, where are we? What's the next bit of a question?
I think one of them was about having a sticker on the actual caddy.
Oh, yes.
Applies to the flats to remind people what they can put in.
Which we would have to do. So similarly to what we do at the moment on the blue bins, we do put stickers and signage up in bin stores. You kind of need, with the flats, to get the message as close to the bins as you can, if you like, as well as giving them those leaflets to keep within the flat itself. But certainly something on the bins definitely helps.
Now, I think Councillor Brossard's idea was to actually put the sticker on top of the actual caddy.
Or the indoor caddy.
Yeah.
That.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, that I think, I mean, for flats, I think that would be a great idea. Because the communications is definitely the key bit with getting people on flats on board and sticking with it. That's going to be the factor, sticking with it. And the easier we make it for them, the more likely they are to carry on. That's the bottom line.
I don't think any resident would want to wander down to the storage cupboard, find out what they could put in the bin, and upstairs and put it in. So if we actually have a sticker on the caddy, that might actually be more beneficial.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Michael, can you remember the other question?
Yeah, the next one was to do with the questionnaire. A number of the other council did actually submit questionnaires, putting them through the letterboxes, either before they introduced the scheme to see if they would, within flats, get some support, or alternatively, where there wasn't support. And interestingly enough, what some of the council did is they actually recovered the caddies because it was clear that after 2 or 3 weeks, there was no effort to actually participate in the scheme. I just wonder if a questionnaire would be beneficial with the flats to actually establish the level of support we might have in order not to waste money unnecessarily.
Yeah, I think we would need to establish the interest before obviously investing. And if we were going to talk about, potential trials, either questionnaires or writing to people to express their interest to us in some way, would be a good starting point. I mean, historically, we have door knocked blocks of flats at various times to get them using blue bins better. And you do get a better kind of communication back from them, I guess, not only around whether they want to recycle and are willing, but perhaps also about things that might be stopping them or making life difficult. So sometimes it can be useful to have that face-to-face conversation with people as well, because you can sometimes get more out of it that actually, obviously, in turn, we learn something then that actually might help it be more of a success.
Well, thank you for that, Claire. I think actually something that actually, Councillor had been raised by Councillor Hayes is the importance of resident engagement to actually get their participation, their support, and such like. Chairman, the very last question was to do with cooking oil. I think it's an excellent idea that we collect cooking oil because people obviously have chips, they have chicken nuggets and such like. I'm not going through the various recipes, but it's something that we do that other councils don't do, and I'm supportive of that, and hopefully within HMOs and flats we can actually collect cooking oil.
Yes, if they were on the food waste service, obviously the same rules would apply as to what applies to the household, and they would be able to put the cooking oil within a bottle and then put it in, if we go for 140 litre bins or if we go for individual caddies, so they'd be able to follow the same track that the houses do.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Sandra, please.
Thank you, Chairman.
Before I pose my question, just wanted to thank you, Claire, for the wonderful communication, actually, because you've done such a good leaflet. We have kept it by our front door. And I have to say, as a new participant, we haven't been going that long, have we? I've really relied on it, because it's got what's happening week by week. And it just reminds you about, as we've just discussed, things like, we can use a plastic bag, that it's all okay. And in fact, Michael, you'd be interested, we're even saving our oil, and we've got 2/3 of a smoothie bottle. Anyway, I digress. So let me just raise my question, which actually is for Kim, because Kim, you said if you reduce residual waste, you see participation in the food recycling. But earlier in your presentation, you said with regard to flats, don't change the frequency of collections. So my question to you, because that sort of set my head spinning a little bit, is then what incentive schemes have you seen working for flats, if any?
Yeah, I realise that does sound very contradictory. And I suppose I was just trying to make the point that when we deal with households, when we have schemes set up in the way that you've got it now, with your 3 weekly, being able to get an extra recycling bin, you're making it very, very easy for residents to comply with the food waste collection service. When we're looking at the way that we collect food waste from flats, often we find that a strong encouragement in flats doesn't always work. Residents don't always want to comply with the new rules, so they still generate the same amount of residual waste. And then if you have reduced the capacity, you end up with extra residual waste. So we don't tend to reduce until such time as it's obvious that the take-up of the food waste, if indeed that happens, is sufficient to allow us to reduce the residual waste in some way or other without causing people any problems. As Claire said before, sometimes people want to participate, but it's very, very hard for them. And then when we reduce residual capacity, it just puts a lot of strain onto people. They really struggle to cope. We tend to find with flats that the best encouragement is that great communication. It's encouragement, it's support, it's help, and it's being available, for Claire and her team to, as Claire said, talk to people, understand what the barriers are and how they can help people. So even though we're talking about flats as a communal residential area with a communal bin store, we have to remember that there are individual households in those flats with individual challenges and wishes, and we have to deal with them on an individual basis often, which is positive and yields good results, but is also time consuming and hard work.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Sandra. Mary, please.
Yeah, following on from that, I know very well there's a block of flats that Claire knows about it as well, but there's people in there, residents, who are really trying. They put out their own letter to every single flat member saying, please get sorted with your recycling, please don't contaminate, please make sure this is, and then they go in and clean out the recycling and make sure it's all right. So they're really going over and above to try and get this recycling in a block of flats sorted out. So any communication with all of them from a council or not is good, and I think that would encourage the people who really want to do this and really want to do what is right. It would be an encouragement and a pat on the back and saying, yeah, we support you.
Thank you, Mary. Kim, I'm just going to go back to similar to what Mary said, but you said that it's trying to get the management companies on board, especially with the problem of cleaning the food waste bins.
Mm.
What experience have you come across how councils deal with management companies that don't want to? Do they then get like environmental health involved to sort of like force the issue, or what other things can be implemented?
I don't have a lot of experience of this. Generally speaking, as a council, you can put a service in, and then it's up to the managing agent whether they choose to get those bins cleaned. And if they don't, then it's, as you said, it becomes a resident and managing agent issue as opposed to a service provider or council issue. I think that it would be very difficult if you were trying to engage managing agents. If they were unwilling to do that, I think it would be very difficult to manage that service going forwards. I'm not sure how other councils have dealt with managing agents. I suspect that they have good relationships with some and not so good relationships with others, much the same as Bracknell, and I would suggest that in looking at a trial, you wouldn't want to be doing a trial for any block where the managing agent was obstructive in any way in that regard. There are other options, but they're not cost effective at all. So there are options for things. We did a trial with schools in food waste in schools quite a number of years ago in Bracknell, and we did what we call bin swaps. So we delivered some bins, and then a week later, we just took those bins away and replaced them with clean bins. And then those bins were brought back to the depot and cleaned. But when you're talking about large numbers of flats that other councillors have referenced, that just wouldn't be cost effective. You wouldn't be able to manage it with the vehicle stock that we've got.
Okay, thanks for that, Kim. Colleagues, does anybody else have any questions for Claire or Kim, please?
Yes, please.
Yes, Tricia.
I just thought of something as Kim was speaking.
I wondered what the noise was.
Clank, clank. With the idea of bin cleaning, the thought of taking away the bins and cleaning them off site did occur to me. I thought that's not going to work. It's too many and too big. But what about a service that's provided by the oh dear, sorry, like Ceres or other collector, where they could do an on-site cleaning every so often rather than taking them away?
We don't provide that sort of service. There are companies that do. There's a company called the Bin Cleaning Company, which is fairly local. We often in sewers, when we collect bins from households that are still usable, we bring them back to the yard and we get the bin cleaning company in to come and clean them so that they can be reused again. So we're not throwing away bins that have perfectly good life. So, and the bin cleaning company, I know that likes of Silver Homes are fully aware of them and have dealt with them before. So there are companies out there who, if managing agents are willing to contract with them, could dovetail in with our collection schedule so they could go to the flats after that we've been and clean the bins on site. It's certainly possible to do with cooperation of all parties.
Thank you, that's useful.
Okay, thank you, Tricia. Sandra, please.
This is just a tricky little question which Claire might be able to throw some light on for me. I do know of both sheltered accommodation and apartment blocks with outdoor open communal bin space as opposed to a bin room type thing. And I know, Claire, you said there was a problem with vermin close to the railway. My question is, generally, do we find across the borough that apartments lock their bin rooms and so residents have key access to them, or how does it work?
To be honest, it varies quite a lot across the borough. We always advise that management agents or housing associations have stores that are lockable. Now, when I say stores, it doesn't necessarily have to be a purpose-built shelter with a roof. It could simply be a fenced area with a gate that can lock. But we do always advise, make sure your bin store can lock. Some of them are quite good at taking us up on that advice, and they always make sure the locks are fitted and working, which obviously means that only the people that should be using that bin store can actually get into it. However, there are quite a number across the borough that have a lock on, but the door's never shut. The lock's broken and it's been reported to the agent and they have failed to fix it. And then there are some that, as you rightly say, that actually the bins are just kind of out in the open with no enclosure at all. Sometimes that works okay, depending on where the flats actually are. and what the kind of neighbouring properties are like and how they're managing their waste. But it really is a complete range across the borough. One thing I'd say from my perspective in terms of helping residents manage problems and things, if the bin store's got a lock and you can pretty much guarantee that only the people that should be using it are using it, solving problems is always a lot easier. As soon as it's open, and it could be anyone, things are much more challenging. But ultimately, of course, these things do come back down onto the management agents again. And it's, as I touched on earlier, there are the good ones out there, and then there's the not so.
So when we were looking at the possibility of selecting apartment blocks for a trial scheme, and they were to have a good recycling record or experience, are you saying it's better to go with ones that have locked facilities?
Yeah, that would probably be the trend. So generally speaking, our blocks of flats with better recycling records are ones that have got contained bin stores with locks. That would probably be the general trend. There are a few exceptions to that across the borough, ones where maybe the bin area is quite secluded and away from where other residents can get it, but still open. They can be quite successful at times. I think what sometimes helps as well is if a bin store is actually overlooked by the people that live in the flats, because obviously the fact that if somebody else was to go along and dump something, if somebody could see them out of their window, that deters that. So it can vary, but generally speaking, if you're looking at a block that's got good recycling, it's normally got a lock on the door.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Does anybody else have any other questions, please? Okay, I see no other hands up, so I'd like to thank, on behalf of this panel, Kim and Claire for your time tonight. It's been very informative. A lot more information for us to digest, no pun intended. And on behalf of this committee, I'd like to thank you for your time tonight, and I wish you well tonight. So, and I know you, Claire, have got a couple of little ones to put to bed, so we finished in time for you. So, yeah. So thank you very much indeed for your time. And
Dorothy wants to say something.
Sorry?
Dorothy is waving her hand.
I can't see Dorothy, so
thank you, Mary. Yes, I cannot put before you a better team that I have the privilege to work with. And I know that you will come up as a working group, John, with the questions, answers, and different things. And going through tonight, I'm pleased with what came out was the design of buildings for the future, let alone what we have at the past, how we get communication out there. The participation of ward councillors, knowing their areas and what is there, and Mary bringing up the factor that she has people that want it. These are the things that will come out now. We'll tease them out, get them out there, know it's there. And I know, John, you'll have that paper ready. And I thank you for being part of it in the teamwork. That's how I call it. It's teamwork and getting the best for our borough. And I'm very pleased that Kim admitted that we surpassed a lot of things with regards to what has happened with our food waste has been very successful, Kim. Thank you. And I do appreciate you allowed me to come along tonight. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Dot. Okay, Kim, Claire, off you go. Emma's going to stop the recording, and if members could just the line, please.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
1 second.
Everybody, have a
Bye,
lovely
everyone. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Claire.